All right, welcome back, everybody. The Ideal 21, the Inclusion, Diversity, Equity, and Accessibility for Learning Conference. Excited to have all of you here today. And here's our next session with Dezirae Choi. I'm so glad, Dezirae, that you stepped in for this one because I think it was Carlita Godsey who had sent me this message, and she had asked me, I have it on a whiteboard over here. She's like, how do you measure DEI success? And I wrote it just on my whiteboard to the side here that no one can see. And I'm like, yeah, we need somebody to talk about that. And then here you are. You're going to be talking about basically that. Show me the numbers, data-informed DEI. And so I really appreciate you coming in and talking about that. I also want to give the shout out to Rubina Holwani, who is a colleague of Dezirae's. And I think it was a few weeks ago, we had a conversation as a group to talk about this event. And I was so impressed by that conversation. And Dezirae, I invited her to come and speak. So Dezirae, I'm going to let you share your background and your info. I'm going to go ahead and hide myself from the screen and let you take it away.
Sounds good. Good morning. So I'm Dezirae. And yeah, I am connected through Rubina to this amazing group. And we met through our work with the state of Utah. So I do instructional design work there. And I also do work in a virtual high school. I started as a teacher, like I know Star in the previous session did as well. So I've taught everything from 6th grade through 12th grade in the social studies field. And then I also adjunct as a professor in the Master's of Education program at a university here, Weber State University. So in a lot of different fields of education and the design part of education and mentoring, and then the tech side of it as well with virtual education and instructional design. So thank you so much for being here today. Like Luis said, we are going to talk about some of the numbers and how we can use them in our DEI efforts. And to start off with, I really want to talk about some of these social categorizations, these identities that come up as we talk about DEI, as we talk about accessibility, other identities, maybe languages we speak, education levels, all of these things that get included, and the components they are and how they make up our identity and who we are, and how we might identify strongly with some pieces and how maybe some of them we don't even think about where we fall within these categories. One of my good friends likened it to a nutrition label or an ingredient list, right? The first ingredient has the most in any recipe or any nutrition label, right? So thinking about your identity, your ingredient list would be your strongest tie, which would be the first for you, right? And you don't have to share with us in the chat, but I just want you to take a moment and think about what would be your first listed ingredient of these categories. Thank you. And thank you for those that are willing to share in chat. I really appreciate that. And of course, as I'm asking you to share, I will definitely share as well. Yeah. And we can see how these all play and how they tie into things like intersectionality or broader ideas, but even just who we are in general. And for me, near the top of my ingredient list, right, I would put my culture, right, my race, my ethnicity, It's something I feel strongly. It's something I try to exemplify, but it's also something when people look at me, they see, and there is assumptions that come with that immediately. To give some background of that, you can see on the screen that gentleman with the mustache is my father. He immigrated to the United States from what was then Western Samoa when he was 19 years old. He came by himself for school. Somewhere between 19 and 25, he met my mom, who is the woman you can see there in that image, in the era of neon and hair scrunchies. My mom was born and raised in the United States. And they were doing their thing. They had two, what I call tester pancake babies. They like to call them my brothers before they had me, right? And all my Afakasi glory, right? So Afakasi in Samoan means half caste. It's what you're called when you're half Samoan and half something else. So my entire life, I've known I am half, right? In the United States, I am seen at the very least as half Samoan. And in Samoa, when I'm able to go and see my family, at the very least, I am half Caucasian, half American. But to myself, I'm always 100% Afakasi, right? Both those identities are so important to me. But it's an interesting place to navigate. So thinking about your identities and your main ingredients, those that you thought about or those that you shared with us, I wanted to ask you, when did you first see your identity, that main ingredient, reflected in your learning experience? Thinking of those strong ties, and not in your classroom or your classmates, not your teachers, but the content and the materials that you were engaging with. When did you see those strong identities? Thank you so much. And you can see in the chat as you read it that there's quite a range of when we saw them, when we didn't, or maybe the context in which we did see these identities reflected in our learning experience. So thank you so much for sharing your thoughts there. As I mentioned before, I do teach a diversity in education course at Weber State University. It's part of the master's program, and it's looking at classroom education, but also in other educational faculties and leadership positions. And we talk specifically about inclusion and exclusion and the impacts those have on learner engagement and on a broad societal scale. And the more I've had those discussions, the more I've noticed a pattern around this topic. Yeah, and it's definitely hitting at what you're saying in the chat as well. Our strong identity ties in dominant groups, it can be harder to pinpoint a single moment, right? Pointing to those comments of always, or as far back as I can remember, than those strong identity ties or those main ingredients in the minority groups, right? Awesome. And Kim, thank you for sharing. I would say, they can. And that's where these things can get kind of more nuanced as we talk about certain things. But to this pattern, and as you've talked about in the chat, what I've noticed in the pattern is the why. In our identities that fall in the dominant groups, when your voice is part of the norm or what's considered the status quo, being included or being reflected is also the norm. And so when I think about my main ingredient, the one I shared with you, that strong identity type, my Afakasi identity, that being reflected in my learning experience, I didn't see that until my sophomore year of college, right? This little one here that you can see on the screen, which is me at, I have no idea what age, it was reflected in my sophomore year, and it wasn't reflected until I transferred to a university in North Shore, Oahu, on Hawaii. And I had the option to take classes like Pacific Islander history or Pacific Island diaspora. And it was there that I really internalized the impact of having those minoritized parts of my identity being reflected in my learning experience. And so through my lens as the learner and as the educator, through my lens as the instructional designer, through my lens with some of my most significant identities being in minority groups and also having identities in dominant groups, through all of those lenses, I can say we have to consciously create diverse, equitable, inclusive, accessible experiences. And I know that we're all here because we feel similarly. Which leads me to the question of how can data help you create a more inclusive experience? And I do want to open up and ask, what are your thoughts as you think about it, or how do you hope data can help you create those more inclusive experiences? Fantastic, thank you. Yeah, no, absolutely. Absolutely, absolutely, thank you. Yes, and that these ideas definitely hit at it. For me, when I was thinking about this question, some of the first two that really hit me where I thought data can help for sure is it's showing us at the very least where we can start, right? Those pieces that we're missing or those perspectives that we're missing. Who should we be asking for input? What source should we be going to when we're trying to reflect these specific identities? And then quite honestly, to help us get buy-in, right? Because here's the thing, when we have these conversations, sometimes they can get into defensive or debating spaces, and we never actually get to a product or to implementation. So we're here because we know it's important, and the data is going to help us get others to the same place. I've seen this through my experience because when I'm building experiences for a classroom, yes, right? I get very specific data on my audience, on my learners. I am handed a lot of their social categorizations. And what I'm not just given, they choose to share because you're able to create a community. Each new quarter or semester is almost like an iteration of a product where I can enhance the learning experience based on bugs that arose in the previous semester, or maybe on new opportunities that arose. And from those experiences, I've developed a base. The foundational considerations when I'm creating a product, right? What kind of images am I using? Are they diverse? Are they inclusive? When I'm looking at language, am I considering the readability? Am I pulling diverse examples? Am I relying too hard on idioms that are maybe excluding others from different areas? What accessibility steps am I taking? Are there accommodations and modifications? And it's really leading into universal design, right? These foundational considerations, where it should. And I'm really excited because the next speakers are talking about universal designs, and they are experts. So they will be going further into that, but that's just a little plug for theirs next. But on top of these foundational considerations, if I'm not given that beautiful spreadsheet of information, how do I reflect my audience or their main ingredients, as it were? How can I be more impactful, right? Where do I go to seek out the data? Starting points, what data does your company have? Do they have access? Are they willing to share what they have? What is your project related to? Is there a general topic that you can search and find information? And barring that, even if there's not that specific information, you can send out questionnaires, or you can, at the very least, get demographics from census information. Right. So when I spoke briefly with the organizers about my audience for today, just about everyone who had registered was US based. So I'm going to focus in a little bit on, well, I'm going to focus in on the United States Census as our data point. There is the Canada-based census, which is Statistics Canada, and most countries have some sort of census data. And Google searches, web searches can get you the demographics you're looking for, at least as a starting point. So when you're looking at the US Census as a starting point, it's got information on age, sex, education, employment, family and living arrangement, race, income, health and disability, and subtopics within those topics. It goes into a lot. And to be fair, there's definitely still gaps within those sources. And that's where a very well-phrased web search can be your best friend. And if this still seems really big and really ambiguous as a starting point, I'm going to show you exactly how we can use these sources to kind of inform and guide our decisions as we are doing this work. So a project that came in was an asynchronous training, and they wanted an intro course to supportive healthcare and treatment approaches. And the audience we were given was the general public, right? And we had some conversations about what does that mean? Who's actually going to take this course? And no matter how we came at it, no matter how we asked the question, general public was always the answer. It's going to be the general public. This is who is taking this course, everyone, right? And this is where data came in for me. What did general public mean, and how could I be inclusive? How can I reflect my audience from just that piece of information? So I went to two sources specifically for this. And my two sources were my state's healthcare treatment data portal and the US Census. Now, to be fair, before this project, I didn't know my state had a healthcare treatment portal. I was able to know it existed because of my work with the state and the department I work in. And I'm going to show you some of that data now. So looking at the data specifically, I was able to go down a rabbit hole and find a lot more information than I ever knew existed out there. And I chose to first focus on the largest county within my state. I figured that would be a great place to start. And within that county, I found that I could see people who were seeking treatment and the primary substance they were seeking treatment for, or the substances they were seeking treatment for. And in that county, The primary substance, so the highest substance people were seeking treatment for, happened to be methamphetamine. And of people seeking treatment for that substance, 35% were female, 30% were male identifying. Right? So that was starting to frame the picture for me. I then went to the United States Census, and I was pulling information I decided on the same county, and I was able to look at population data, look at information on sex, education, family size, socioeconomic status factors like home ownership and income, right? And as I started to get an idea of who my audience might be, I started to get a direction on how to reflect their identities in this experience, right? This learning experience I was being asked to create. But this was a double ask because I also needed to communicate why this was my audience, right? Why this was my general public. And I needed to justify the decisions I was making and to figure out what would be relevant to those in those social categories. Because I'm not going to know everything that's important to the people that fall within certain categories, right? And a Google search can start the conversation, but it's not going to give me the perfect answers. So with that in mind, I decided to turn to learner personas, right? And in your use case, it might be user personas, but they're fairly similar, right? And with a learner persona, I was able to take the data I was pulling from these resources, and this information became this. Right? And this is now showing me where to build from my foundational considerations, who I need to workshop with to make sure that my content is relevant. Who do I need to be reflecting as I build this experience? On top of that, it's giving a compelling story to my stakeholders, but that compelling story is informed by data as to why those are the voices that are being reflected in this experience. So the TLDR, right, the too long, didn't read, use the data as the foundation to finding the social identities in your audience. It's there in one form or another. You just have to do a little digging. Reflect your audience in the experience. Talk to them, workshop with them, find out what's relevant to them, and then humanize the data through learner and user personas to get buy-in from your stakeholders. And that wraps up the official prepared portion of what I have for you today. But if you have questions or if there's anything you want to talk about, please let me know.
Yeah, let's see. Does anyone have any questions? Go ahead and post them in the QA area. Be happy to field anything you got. I see that Molly posted Desiree's LinkedIn profile, so make sure you connect to Dezirae on LinkedIn. And let's take a look. Yeah, and Molly, thanks for posting those links up in there. Looks like we do have one. We have a question from Kristen in here. Can you talk through a little bit how you translate the demographics into qualitative information in the personas?
Yeah, I would love to. So this is where I really debated between titling this data driven versus data informed, because when you go to these learner personas, in some sense, there is a little bit of filling in or fictionalizing a bit. But if you look at the two personas, so we can look at Olivia Smith is the one that I used first. I chose to use someone who identified as female based on the information of the substance misuse statistics, that for the particular substance, they were someone who would be female statistically. Then if you look at this, the statistics on the county itself, the education rate, at least, I'm pulling up the numbers now, at least 90% of people in the county have at least a high school degree. So I decided that she would be a high school graduate. And then that led to the well-worded Google search. I just looked up popular jobs in this county with a high school degree, or that require a high school degree. And I figured it wasn't super relevant to the story. I didn't spend a lot of time. I just picked one that kind of made sense, right? So that's where it's a little more informed and not so driven. I decided, you know what, the average family size based on the census data is 2.99. So she's going to have a spouse and she's going to have a child. That'll get us close to 2.99 within a family there. So that's kind of the decisions where there are numbers to back up a lot of things, but there are also elements in this story, like why she might be worried about substance misuse, that are more fictionalized.
Love it. Yes, excellent. All right, let's see. Katrina has another question here. How do demographics like substance abuse affect considerations for instructional design? Oh, it says, I don't know if that's a spelling error. It says substance, but I saw substance abuse. I think that it's supposed to be substance abuse. Yeah, how do demographics like substance abuse affect considerations for instructional design?
So what I've seen from my experience with this kind of speaks to something that comes into a lot of different social categorizations here, where we don't know where we don't know, and workshopping and getting the opinions of those who are involved is going to be very important, right? Because you can be as careful as you want to be, you can be Googling and looking and trying to be inclusive or relevant, and you still might miss the mark. So here, you know, there are best practices, there's things that I'm going to try and do, but there's things that people who are in the field or who have experiences will be able to tell me, don't use this word, it's not appropriate. Don't use this image, it's a triggering image. Where I might have thought, oh, I thought it represented it well.
Excellent. Thank you. And then let's see, Kristen, follow-up question. Do you try to match the demographics exactly, or do you tend to prioritize marginalized groups a bit more to ensure that you're overcorrecting?
That's a really great question. So I think you have to use it as a starting point, right? And it's using it. The example I thought of when I was really trying to think about this question came from my classroom teaching. When you have a student who has accommodations or who has modifications that they need because of a learning disability, you don't say, that's 1% of my class, that's fine. I'm okay not doing that or ignoring that because they're not the majority. You find a way to meet their needs. And usually, like through things with universal design, you pull in ways that will meet that student's needs and hit everyone in the classroom in the same way and help them. So through design as well, are you overcompensating or trying to beef up the numbers? Maybe, but at least you know, like for instance, with my Mateo Garcia learner persona. I was trying to find images. I knew the demographic was Hispanic Latino, and the images I was finding, I couldn't find one that I liked. And I found one that was for a gentleman from the Dominican Republic. But I did a quick search, and there's not a lot of people in the county that have come from a heritage or a background of Dominican Republic. So it didn't quite make sense to include that image. Could I? Yeah, absolutely. Would it have been better than nothing? Absolutely. But it wasn't the most data informed decision for me to make. And a 5-minute Google search on what could be a better decision made a better experience overall.
Excellent. See, Kim is asking, so for your example course, did you actually interview people who had abused math?
I did not. That is a really great question. And I'm very lucky with where I work. They have work groups through the state already set up, either through support systems or grants that have people that are already reviewing or on call to do this kind of work. So it's already a very robust peer review system built into the infrastructure, which is really nice that we have access to it. If I didn't, I would probably rely on the data a lot more and then reach out to a facility maybe in my area and ask if they had best practices or what they did.
Excellent. Okay. Molly's asking, is there a way to find the census data on a company that you are working on a training project for or are interviewing with?
That, I'm trying to think. Some companies are more open than others with the information they have out there. So as I was trying to think about what to talk about with this, I was speaking with a friend who does UX UI work, and she was sending me companies that were like, look at them, look how easy it was to find here. And then there's companies where we couldn't find anything. So this is where my well-worded web search comes in hand, right? I would type it in, I would look at, and then this is where you're trying to get as close as you can, because it's not going to be perfect, but it's going to give you at least a starting point. And if you're building something for them, you can ask, right? And tell them the reasoning behind it, see what they do. Or I know we have LinkedIn, we have social media things, see if there's people in tangent industries that might be similar responses.
Great. Okay. Got it. Just a couple more questions here. Pooja is asking, if we did nothing else, what is one thing we could all do immediately to drive more data-informed DEI?
If you did nothing else, I would say look at who is actually being affected by what you're making and see if you're reflecting them.
Nice one. Yeah, no, that's great. I'm going to even just give that one some thought for myself. All right. And last question here. This one's from Katrina. What's the line between using representative images of a demographic and using stereotypical images and examples?
This is such a great question because I think we've all come up against it at one point or another. And this is where start with your best judgment and then ask, right? You have to, because I can speak for people, well, I can speak for myself, and I can maybe give some opinion of people who have similar experiences to me, but I can't speak for everyone who has an identity of a person of color in the United States, right? So if you're trying to show a very particular identity, talk to people who have that identity and see how they feel about it.
All right. And I think that's it for the Q&A. Chat has been great. I think I saw something in here where Rubina's asking if you're going to be able to jump into the lounge, maybe, and talk for a little bit. I'm sure you can go to Rubina's table and
Yeah.
hold court over there.
I was like, if Rubina can make room, I would love to hang out with her in her room there for a little bit after.
All right. All right. That's great. Okay, everybody. So thanks so much for attending this one. We've got, let's see, we're more than halfway through the day, or we're halfway through the day. Next one is going to be with Suzanne Ehrlich and Michelle Bartlett. We're talking about, what was it? It was UDL and empathy mapping and reducing barriers in L&D. I'm really looking forward to that as well. Have fun in the networking area, and we'll see everyone in the next one. Thank you.